Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 170, and today I'm going to be talking about how to not worry about the draft portion of your draft, because I've seen that during the coaching, by the way, available, and I've seen that during the discussion on my Discord, by the way, available, that people are sometimes having a lot of regrets from their drafts, and they agonize over certain picks, that they had to pass something, and then later something else arrived, and one lane was cut, and maybe their first pick could have been a different busted rare. And I think that worry is often not really warranted. So I'm hopefully going to show you some numbers that might convince you that there is no point in worrying about the draft portion that much. It's important to pick the best cards, but it's not a tragedy if the line that you first choose is not completely open and you have to divert from it. It's not the end of the world as you know it. Obviously, this show is brought to you by the patrons who are kind enough to patronage me. And we have 3 new patrons. We have Alexander, we have Carson, and we have Fogo Norabo. So thank you very much for joining the Patreon and finding your way to the Discord. And I'm hoping to hear more of you. Okay, and before we go to the main topic of the seminar today, my preamble is, well, fear stifles. And it's a well-known fact. Our responses that are made in fear are very often impulsive and not rational. And because of that, they are not great in a situation when analytical thinking is important. And this is like something that we know from behavioral sciences. There are those basically, as proposed by Kahneman, 2 systems of thinking. The system 1, which is the impulsive one, which is great, if you have to react to something sudden and you need to make a split-second decision because time is of essence. These are the things that we also do when we want to preserve some mental energy. So, for example, when we want to use heuristics, this is exactly what we do. We use the instinctive way of thinking. Of course, those heuristics are going to be developed over time, so it's not that you don't need to think first about developing them. But once they are in place, you can instinctively come up with some idea and react to that. And there is the system 2 of thinking, which is more analytical, slow, but more energy costly. And during drafting, it's very easy to go into this fear panic state and start making instinctive decisions. And it's not always going to end up in tragedy, but it's not the optimal way of solving analytical problem, which draft is one of. So if you are thinking about improving in draft, I think that removing the instinctive reactions and snap picking and all those like fast kind of instinctive behaviors that don't employ the analytical system of our brain, you're going to go far, because the more analytical you approach the draft, the better thought through your picks will be. And my perennial advice on that is, when you look at the pack and you see the card that you want to pick, always pick the second and third best card that you also would want to pick from that pack, without the intention of picking them, but with the intention to artificially slowing down your brain and deliberately turning on this more analytical way of thinking. And part of that there are 2 preambles today. I'm very generous with preambling today, but okay. Part of the preamble is the draft that I played earlier, and I had these 2 cards as my first pick choices. And I picked United Front. So the 2 choices I have is United Front, the X white sorcery. You make X white allies and you put a counter on each of your creatures. And I had Azula, Cunning Usurper, the 5 mana, the mirror card. It's a 4/4. When it enters, target opponent exiles one of the creatures they control that is not a token. And then they exile a non-land card from their graveyard. And you can, during your turn, you can cast those spells for any amount of mana. Any mana can be used to cast them. Azula also has firebending, and you can cast those spells as though they had flash. So if Azula survives one turn, you can attack with her, get 2 mana, instant speed cast whatever you exiled with it, and it's a good 3-for-1 if you manage to cast both cards from opponent's collection. And actually, I think that on paper this is a no-brainer pick. United Front, I think, is a better card. Both of them are great, but I think that United Front is a better card in vacuum. It's monocolored, a bit heavy on the color actually, but you want to cast it pretty late if possible. So maybe the double pip is not an issue, even if you're not like super heavy into white. It's a stronger card. It has higher win rate. So technically, that's a no-brainer pick. However, I don't know, in recent week or so, I noticed that white is severely overdrafted. So, and blue-black comes together quite readily. So my only decision that I was making here, do I pick the best card in the pack, which is United Front, or do I pick still an amazingly great card, Azula, but with the caveat that it's a weaker card. It requires 2 colors, so I'm defining myself from the first pick. And I decided to pick the United Front in the end. And it comes as no surprise. And then, of course, my draft went that in the first pack, I picked like second pick, I picked like an uncommon Momo. Third pick, maybe Glider Kids. And then there was just nothing in white. I started veering into blue a bit, but that also looked pretty cut. And later in the pack, I started getting some green cards, and I sort of settled on drafting green and waiting whether blue or white is more open, with the tiebreaker that I definitely would prefer to play white given the United Front. And white sort of opened up a bit during that draft. So in the end, I was starting to get some sort of white cards. Nothing special, not even at uncommon level, just like playable fine commons. At the same time, I got past the Rise of Sozin in pack 3, the Day of Black Sun in pack 3, the Mechanist, Serial Artisan in pack 3, all those cards that would have been amazing in the blue-black deck. And, this can generate this kind of feeling of loss, regret, and fear that you've made the wrong first pick choice. In the end, I ended up with a deck that has a bunch of like medium common creatures, like bunch of compassionate healers, bunch of Zhong's deserters. I have 2 water captains, glider kids that I mentioned, the White Lotus reinforcements, and a couple of badger moles, and basically only 1 rare in this United Front. And a bit of a sort of side earthbending package. I have Rocket Launch and Earthbending Lesson. Rocket Launch with 8 forests, so it was not like the best Rocket Launch deck ever in the history. But my rationale here was that I have a bunch of 2-drops. I am pretty aggressive. I have tricks. I have the United Front. And I have 2 Badger Moles, which give all my creatures with counters trample. And the idea is, even if I cast this Rocket Launch as a 3-mana 3/3 haste later in the game, that's absolutely fine. I'm actually happy with that. And if I manage to cast that Rocket Launch on a pre-existing earthbend creature, and all of a sudden attack for like 6 with trample, that's exactly what I need to do to close the games out. But I still had this regret of this blue-black deck that probably passed me through. But a bit of regret does not mean I was despairing or anything. I just played out my games. I won the first one, then I lost 2 next games, and then I managed to somehow win 6 next. And this deck actually trophied. It's not a particularly great deck, but it is assertive. It is consistently built. Most of the games, I despite not having basically any removal either. Most of the games I managed to just overwhelm my opponents by generating a wider board, and if I had some trouble, I just drew United Front and then won from there. Or sometimes I just made like a 9/9 earthbending vigilance creature and killed my opponent through that. And then normally I come back to my draft logs, and I went back to look at this Rise of Sozin, look at this Day of Black Sun and the Mechanist, and I looked how would my blue-black draft look like, and it wouldn't be amazing, honestly. I would have had all those bombs that I mentioned, potentially even more, a couple of extra rares here and there. But I wouldn't also have, and I would have really, really strong removal. So there was also Heartless Act I would have picked up, Epic Downfall I would have picked, bunch of Watery Grasps. But I would have very, very poor creature package. I looked through this deck and through this draft, and there was literally no good blue or black creatures being passed around that would make me that would make this deck more functional. I think that this is the problem sometimes that I found in the mirror, that I end up with a good spell package and good removal and maybe a bomb or two, but I end up with lack of defensively good creatures. I like Messenger Hawks, and I would have gotten a bunch of those in this draft as well. But Messenger Hawks are great in attacking, but they're terrible blockers because it's really hard to trigger their attack increase on your own turn. And because of that, there's basically 1-2 blockers, which is not good if opponents start attacking you with like, I don't know, a 2/4 or something. Like Iroh can completely wreck you because you can't block it with your 1/2 efficiently, which leads to you having to start firing up removal on a mediocre creature, and then the big creatures will kill you. And that's the problem with this type of deck. So potentially I would have had maybe even, well, probably a better deck than the white green that I drafted because of the bombs. Just the Rise of Sozin and Azula and Day of Black Sun. That's a good combination of cards that can win games on its own. But would it be that better than my white green rubbish commons conglomeration? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Even if I look through the logs, and I tweeted that one, and I tweeted the log to the games and the draft. So if you're curious, just go on my Twitter or Blue Sky. On both of those platforms, there is the log to this draft, and you can see what my lane was and how would my blue-black deck look like if I decided to pick Azula and pick one. But we have those picks like United from Azula pretty often, and I think that people agonize way too much over those things. Just pick what you prefer to play, because in the end, no damage is done whatever you picked. You picked a strong card, and lean into your personal preferences, lean into what you never played with before. That was part of me as well. I mean, I never played with United Front. I drafted Azula before, and I played it in Sealed. So United Front was a bit more appealing also from that angle for me. And I'm hoping to address some of those worries later when we go into the draft data. But second part of the preamble, I have committed a thread on the socials, again, Blue Skies and Twitter, about the World Championship. And if you're wondering, for those of you that listen, the screen shows a block of 31 cards. And there's like Island, Multiversal Passage, Storm Chaser Talent, Boomerang Basics, Gene Pollinator, Soul Guide Lantern, Torpor Orb, Grand, bunch of other mainly red and blue spells with this splattering of Badgermole, Kablan, War Elves, and Gene Pollinator and Enduring Vitality. And if you're wondering what those cards are, these 31 cards. So last weekend we had the World Championship. And there was 126 players with registered decks in Standard, which totaled to something like 9,400 and something cards registered for that tournament. And I did some counting. I took all those decks. I calculated how many copies of each card were there. And these 31 cards accounted for over 50% of all the cards registered at the World Championship. These 31. I went a bit deeper on that. There are 3,715 cards legal in Standard, and 299 of them were present in any of the World Championship decks. So less than 10%, maybe 8% of the cards that are available in Standard are were present at the Worlds, which of course is not super surprising that it's a small fraction, because we're not going to play Merchant of Many Hats and I don't know, a 3-mana Reach Death Striker in constructed decks even in standard. These cards are just too weak on raid. But we also have hundreds and hundreds of rares, and only very few of them make it to the constructed. Keep in mind that Worlds is a small tournament with a bit of an specific metagame, because we only get the top of the top of the top. And that might, tilt people to playing the best deck. But we also have to keep in mind that this was the world of a very new format that no one ever played on the big scene, which means that there will also be different innovations from different teams, which might actually boost a certain amount of diversity. If that tournament would have been redone today, I'm pretty sure that lessons would be a good 30-40% of the field, and not 15% that it was during the tournament. So 300 roughly cards are the ones that were present in all the world's decks, which means that 5 of them were basic lands. You need to own a playset of 295 cards, and not even a playset, because a bunch of them were just present in 1, 2, or 3 copies in the whole tournament. Maybe there were a couple of singletons across multiple decks. But if you have playsets of 295 cards from the recent sets, you could build every single deck that there is in the World Championship. When you think about it, it's not much. It's just like 1,200 cards, and you have the whole standard. Obviously, there are tier 3, tier 4 decks that people will be playing at larger tournaments. So I'm pretty sure that if we had have a tournament with 1,000 players, with maybe a weaker player base than the World Championship, which is not difficult. Literally every tournament in the world has a weaker player base than the World Championship. That card pool would expand. But I'm still pretty sure that no more than 60 cards will make up 50% of the registered cards. And this shows you the potential and partially the reason why standard can be so expensive. We have a lot of sets being released, and if only a handful of cards. By the way, out of those 31, you can see there is 2 mythics, Bajramol Kaab and Quantum Riddler, somewhere there, and a couple of lands that are rare. So we have the Multiversal Passage card that was almost omnipresent, Riverpire Verge, Spirebluff Canal, Breeding Pool, Botanical Sanctum, Starting Town, and Flood Farm Verge. So these are the lands, rare lands. And apart from that, the only other rares are Storm Chaser Talent, Spider Sense, Roaring Furnace, and Thunder Trap Trainer, Enduring Vitality, and Torpor Orb. Well, Torpor Orb, technically rare mythic, who knows? Because it was one of the cards in the Vault part of the OTJ. And a bunch of cards at very low rarity. We have Torture Towers, we have Boomerang Basics, we have Llanowar Elves, we have Pyroclasms, Combustion Technique, Firebending Lesson, Gran, Anu. All those, Gene Pollinator, all those cards are common. But, people who buy boxes and who are trading with cards, they need to sell those cards as singles for a profit. There is a good reason why Stock Up costs $10. It carries a lot of the worth of the box of Ether Drift on its shoulders. There is a good reason why Bajramol Kaab and Quantum Riddler are $50, $60. They are what sells the boxes of Avatar and Edge of Eternity, respectively. Now, I'm pretty sure that this table will look very differently soon, and then Monument to Endurance and Artist Talent, which I thankfully have already a playset of, because buying it right now is not a cheap endeavor. Those 2 cards will also carry a lot of value of the boxes of their respective formats. Because there are so few playable, rare, and mythic cards in standard set, those cards will be very expensive. And this is what makes the decks in standard not really affordable for majority of the players. We're living in times where standard deck can be between like $400 and $800 to play. And incentive of building one to win a $30 promo on your store championship is probably not sufficient. And I think that until the price of a deck in standard will not drop to between 100 and 200, it's not going to be a popular format. That's it. Because the decks rotate too quickly. And I know standard should not rotate for 3 years. And yet somehow, for me, it rotated twice this year because first my Cory Steel Cutters went bye-bye, and then my Vivis and my Screaming Nemesis went bye-bye, which, yeah, of course, it's not a rotation, it's a ban. But might as well have been a rotation because I lost probably, like whatever amount of dollars in those cards that are no longer playable in standards, and then I have to, of course, buy new ones in order to be up to date with what current standard is done. We can live for the next couple of months, and maybe Badger Mole Cup will be banned. I don't think so, but technically a possibility. And then I will be stuck with those as well. Or Quantum Riddlers gets banned, and Storm Chaser's Talent, also another cheap card, can get banned. They can go for Artist Talent, that will get banned. It's not a rotation, it's a ban, but it will still like completely discredited all the stuff that I did to get to certain decks, and now have to get a new one. And I think that it's a bit disingenuous to say that rotation is every 3 years when you have increased frequency of banning cards in standard. This was a rarity before. We've been through literal decade of Magic where nothing was banned in standard, and now we seem to have a ban every 6 months or so. But yeah, until that problem is solved, I'm worried about the state of competitive Magic, because there is just not enough incentives to play. It's too expensive for young players to even enter that circuit, and of course, that means that people will prefer to play Commander on no competitive stakes, because it's cheaper. You can find just 4 people to play with. You don't need to worry about how tournament structure and be on the whim of someone showing up or not showing up in the LGS. It's just much easier. I mean, for me, it never worked. I don't like the 4-player game dynamics, and I do like competitive tournaments, but I have to also acknowledge that I am not the representative Magic player. The representative Magic player is someone who plays Commander and doesn't care about tournament scene and competition. And this is the reality we live in. This is not the reality I feel optimal with. I would prefer to have a thriving tournament scene whenever I go. But until pricing changes, it won't be possible. And I am not a person who knows much about the economy of producing cards. This is not something I am an expert in. So I can't give advice to, like, in honesty, I can't give an advice to WotC on what they should be doing. I'm also not a deck designer or not a card designer. And, people who design Magic sets know way better than me what to do. But I do have a couple of things that I think might be improving the situation. And first one is really simple. It's put those super rare, pricey variants of cards into the normal packs. Right now we have this split when in play boosters you can get certain variants, but the super chase rares, the neon angs, and then the limited series whatnots are only available in collector boosters. And because of that, there is no good value in play boosters. And because of that, that value has to go to the chase mythics. Adding some of those super chase cards would put some of the price burden of the pack onto those super rare chase cards. And a lot of the card games do that. They have super rare Pokemons in the normal Pokemon pack, and you open one per every case or whatever, but it's still value of it is so high that it actually discounts all the other cards in those packs. And I think that would be a no-brainer solution to that. You probably only will keep serialized cards in collector boosters, but all the other variants. Okay, I know I misspelled worlds, but I already had it and I didn't feel like changing it. Okay, I thought no one will notice, but of course. And yeah, so that's one. The other one is slow down standard. You are designing the game. You should know what turn do decks kill. And right now, the decks can be pretty fast, and fast decks limit what is possible. And by slowing them down, you can expand the solution space. If you expand the solution space, all of a sudden multiple archetypes are viable. And if multiple archetypes are viable, you use more cards. And if you use more cards, then the price of those cards will be split among those multiple cards rather than one mythic carrying the value of the whole set. If multiple cards carry the value, individually they'll be cheaper, which means that instead of one deck having a mythic that costs $60, you will have 4 different decks with 4 different mythics, each of them $15. And that will drop the price quite substantially because you have a playset for 60 rather than for 240. Third one is just stop printing bloody, very cheap blue interaction spells or red interaction spells that do things for 1 mana that should not be done. Already Torch the Tower is pushed, but the combustion technique in the Lessons deck is just like 1 mana deal 7. That's too good, I think. That's too good. You need to have a dedicated deck for that. But it is helped with the fact that that dedicated deck also has access to sort of Ancestral Recall, which is generally considered to be a solid card. In, of course, the Accumulate Wisdom. So I think that they push and push on those super cheap value engine cheap 1 mana cards like, Storm Chaser's Talent, Boomerang Basics, Match Made in Heaven. At the same time, Boomerang Basics answers any kind of thing for 1 mana. And it doesn't get you ahead on board because they can recast it, but gets you ahead on mana tremendously because you spent 1 mana to deal with their 4 mana threat, and they have to repay 4 mana to recast it and lose a turn. It's just too efficient, especially when mixed up with this flexibility of the card. Anyway, I'm sure that WotC is working on it because they also want to have a thriving tournament scene. I don't know what ideas they have, but I thought I'm going to put myself out there and communicate. So if you are interested, you can find the thread on Twitter. It's pretty long, but maybe worth a read. Enough of talking about Constructed. As I mentioned, I have some new patrons, and one of the new patrons, Unintended Recursion, asked me a question. How do I know if a powerful deep color, say white in TLA, is open? And it's a very good question because if color is deep, it's very easy to fall into a trap of drafting it when it's not really open while thinking that it's open because we see cards that we're sort of okay with. I mean, this was the case for my deck. I was fully aware that white is not open in the first pack, and I still went for it because of the power of the United Front, but I knew that it's not open because I saw the signs on the wall. To answer that question, I think that first thing is to stop associating signaling with card power because it's not good enough. I think that how late does a card go in the draft is generally a good proxy of a card power, but it does not always work like that. Win rate is well correlated with pick orders, but it's not a perfect predictor. And first thing to do to figure out if the colors are open is to start using ALSA more. Because ALSA, also known as average last seen as, is a better metric of how late the cards go because it literally measures that. Not only that, win rates are measured only for 17 lands users. ALSA is measured for every arena user because it's based on what people on the pod are passing, independently whether they are 17 lens users or not. And there is this graph that I recreated. I made this graph before. I made it for, I think, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I made it, I think, for Wilds of Eldraine or something. And now I remade it for Avatar, The Last Airbender. And this is the ALSA to probability of wheeling a card when you opened it. And golden rule of that is that if ALSA of the card is 4, which means on average you will see it pick 4 in the booster, you sometimes see it later, probably like 40% of the time you will see it after pick 4, but sometimes it will be picked before pick 4. Probability of wheeling with ALSA 4 is 10%. So 10% of the time, you open a card, you see it, and it will come back to you. If the ALSA is 5, it goes up to 30%. And it sort of does the same throughout. So if it's If it's 6, it will be 50% of wheeling. So card with alpha 6 are coin flip if they are wheeling or not if you open them. And at alpha 7, we go to 70% probability of wheeling that card, which is quite a lot. Like 2 out of 3 times you will see the card back, even a bit more. And this is easy to remember because, 4 10%, 5 30%, 6 50%, 7 70%. And it's useful for you to know when you're drafting because you can always look through your pack and you see 2 cards, you're interested in both of them. Well, pick the one that has a lower probability of wheeling, which means pick the one with the lower alpha, because that one is more likely to be snatched from you. While the ones that have a higher alpha at least give you a chance of wheeling, especially when you want 2 cards in the similar color. So picking one actually makes you actively want to pick the other one. It's also sometimes a tiebreaker for me. If I see 2 comparable commons, but the other one comes with this like Alsa 7 card that I actually would actively want in my deck, I'm going to pick the one with the in the same color as the Alsa 7 because that gives me a good opportunity that with one pick, I pick 2 cards that I want in my deck, which is always a great feeling. And yeah, generally a good indicator cards are going to be common and uncommon creatures because they will be in that sweet spot. So here we have, because the question was specifically about white in The Last Airbender. Here we have this kind of table with all the white cards, just pure white. I didn't count the hybrid cards in it. And what is the probability of that this card is still going to be in the pack at a given pick? So, for example, we have a card like Aang's Iceberg. And already at pick 3, there's only 30% chance of seeing Aang's Iceberg in the pack. How do we know it? Well, from the data, because I can calculate what is the base level of opening each rare in the set. I can see how many Aang's Icebergs do I see in pack 3. And by dividing those two numbers, I can come up with, that means that 70%, 72% of Aang's Icebergs are already gone by pack 3. And then at pack 4, you see it 17% of the time. At pack 5, you see it 6.5% of the time. And it then erodes to zeros very quickly. But that means that if you see Aang's Iceberg at pick 4, this is a pretty strong signal that white is somehow open. Because, well, it only happens, 17% of the time. What is it? One every between 5 and 6 times, something like that, which is quite rare. Aang's Iceberg is a problematic predictor because we see the signal where it's strongest and the most informative because 70% is something that will happen reliably, but you know that it's not something that is a given. But the problem is that you see that strong signal of like 30%, 17% of the card present very early, so in pack 3. It's possible to imagine a pack that has Aang's Iceberg as the third best card. Because, I don't know, we open Rise of Sozin and Invasion Submersible and Aang's Iceberg. I'm pretty sure I would have picked both Rise of Sozin and the Submersible above Aang's Iceberg. And then you see Aang's Iceberg. It doesn't tell you anything about the color preferences of the opponents, but it does tell you something. In this case, it would tell you that there were just 2 better cards. And it will often happen, and it will somehow confuse you into thinking that the color is open when in fact it was just more powerful cards were opened, and maybe those players later started drafting white. That's why I'm not a big fan of picking those cards like Aang, The Last Airbender, Earth Kingdom Jailer, Aang's Iceberg, South Pole Voyager. Those cards that, give you the signal on pack 3, pack 4. I don't like to treat them as a strong signal because I can imagine packs where those cards would not be the strongest, and rightfully so will be passed. What I'm interested in is those cards that you see them at pick 8, pick 9 at this 30% or less frequency. So if I have Glider Staff in pick 8, That will happen 15% of the time. Then I know that, oh, this is something rare, and that glider stuff passed through enough people, actually literally through the whole table, without being picked up. And maybe the first person opened a rare, and maybe second had a stronger uncommon, but third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh person not picking the glider stuff. Now this is a signal to me that something is up there. Cards like Path to Redemption, Earth Kingdom Protectors, Airbending Lesson, Appa, Loyal Sky Bison. And here we have this first example. Sometimes bad cards are good indicators. Appa, Loyal Skull Bison is not a card I want to draft. But the fact that I don't want to draft it does not mean that I shouldn't read it as a signal. In, I think, Zendikar Rising, I was frequently reading the pacifism that I never wanted. I think, put it in my deck. But I was always watching if they are still in the pack quite late, because I knew that alsa for that card was very low. People were picking it very highly, which means if I see it later, white is probably open. And that was a very good signal card. It still doesn't mean that I want to pick it. But sometimes I just picked it because, hey, I need to cut white in order to get white on the wheel. And then we have like secondary cards that are sort of decent signals. Glider Kids, Kyoshi Warriors, Avatar Enthusiasts. These cards will be rare enough at pick 9, and then you can treat them as a sort of signal. Or Water Tribe Captain, or Gather the White Lotus and Fancy Footwork. All those cards go late. What I don't like, and I really would warn you against, is like looking at win rate, because you have cards like Yip Yip, which has a solid win rate. I would never treat it as a signal, because first of all, people will not play too many Yip Yips in their deck, which means that if they got theirs early, they might pass it even though it's a good card. Yip Yip will have a very high alsa. This card almost always wheels. So you can't put too much weight on seeing it. It's not, you can't go like, oh, there's a Yip Yip in the pack. It has 58% win rate, and therefore white is open. You will go to the wrong conclusions. That's why I tell you to focus on good common and uncommon creatures. Your, maybe even like Water Tribe Rallier, maybe your Momo, maybe your Team Avatar. Those cards are going to be good early signals because I pick 5 those cards. Mid signals, you get your Kyoshi Warriors, Glider Kids, your Airbending Lessons. You'll see them between pick 7 and 9. And then those later cards, when signal is at pick 11, 12, 13, this is not really a signal that white is open. This is just a signal that the card is bad. Or in case of Yip Yip, card is so specific that you can't put too many of those into your deck. Oh, hopefully that answers the question, how to spot if the deep color is open. Focus on 2-3 mana playable creatures from that color. If you start seeing them pick 8, pick 9, you're probably onto something. If the color is rightfully challenged, and it's worth exploring a bit the alsa table and memorizing a couple of key cards and knowing the simple graph that alsa 4 wheels 10% of the time, alsa 5 30, alsa 6 50, and alsa 7 70. All right, preambles and question of the week gone. Let's look at the metagame evolution. And I should have asked the chat before, but maybe today is not the day to ask the chat, but okay. Last week, we had Azorius being the best color combination, color pair, at 57.5, and then Selesnya and then Boros, all of them within 0.5% of each other. And then there was a step change, and we had things like Izzet and Demir a bit lower, and then even further, Golgari, Gruul, and Orzhov. But it has tremendously leveled up. The difference between the best color combination, which is Boros, by the way, and the second half of the format, so last week and a bit, basically. Boros at 56.5, which is still a drop from 57 it was last week, but it was smaller of a drop than the Selesnya and Azorius, which means that Boros is now on top. Then we have Izzet, which sort of increased by a very marginal amount. It's now at 56.4. And then we have Selesnya and Azorius at 56, and sort of Demir also at 56. Then we have Golgari, Gruul, and Orzhov at 55.3, 55.2, which means that the win rate difference between the best color combination, Boros, and the 8th best combination, Orzhov, is 1.3 percentage points. 1.3 percentage points is nothing. Basically, the first 8 color pairs are all equally playable in terms of win rate of the decks. Now, obviously, do I think that Orzhov is as strong as Azorius? No. I think Azorius in vacuum is a much stronger deck. And if Azorius is open, I'm going to end up with the strongest deck. But Azorius is also drafted highly right now, which means that you will not see that color pair open. This was part of the rationale why I was tanking between picking United Front, clearly better card, and Azula, because I predict that White might be cut and I will end up with those this United Front not being castable in my deck for some reason. 2 colors are slightly behind, and Simic not too behind. It's at 54.8, which is still under 2 percentage points difference between this and Boros. But Azorius is struggling because it has 52.7 and 56.5. Well, that's roughly 4 percentage points. Nerdy Steve is bragging that that he is the reason why Black Red is so low in the win rate. I'm sure it's not only you. You can't take all the credit, Steve. Okay, this is the win rate, and we saw that there was shifts. Some things dropped down, some things went up. What is interesting is how does it look like in terms of the play rate. Play rate was actually pretty fine in terms of evenness. There was the Boros, Izzet, and Selesnya at around 11%. Azorius and Demir drafted a bit higher, that's 17 and 13%. And then a bunch of the other colors at around 6.5%, 7.5% of the Golgari, Gruul, Orzhov, Simic, and Rakdos. This has changed somewhat. The Boros, Izzet, and Selesnya stayed roughly at their 11%, 12% maybe draft rate. Azorius is getting more and more drafted, and Demir even more. The Demir jumped from 13 to 15%. Petit Bear Wowie is asking, I understand the white-blue drop because of the play rate, but what did the green-white drop to? Well, it's partially linked because green-white wants to be heavy white. If the play rate of Azorius is increasing, then there is less white going around the table. And if there is less white going around the table, you are going to suffer at least some penalty in how strong your deck is, because your white-green decks will have to be more green than white, and this is maybe not as beneficial as having predominantly white deck with some outliers in terms of power level from green. So I think that would explain most of it. What we see in the latter half of the win rate table, we see Golgari and Gruul dropped, both of them, from 7 to 6.3 and from 6.5 to 5.8. Orzhov got more popular a bit from 7.8 to 8.6. And we have Simics at 6.5. And then we see Rakdos, which dropped from 7.6 to 5.3. And despite that drop, still also dropped in terms of the win rate, which means that Rakdos in this format is sort of something I would avoid. I'm not saying it's not playable, because you can make a good Rakdos deck. I would just probably need a very good reason to try to be there. And I don't think even that Firelord Ozai is a good enough reason to do that. What I would like to stress is that both Azorius and Demir seem heavily overdrafted by 17 lands users. By the way, Petit Bear, this is another part of the explanation. We see the draft rates by 17 lands users. 17 lands users are, well, far from a significant fraction of all the arena users. Because of that, they might have higher preference for Azorius and Demir and not for Selesnya to the same extent. But maybe the general population is actually overdrafting Selesnya because they discovered that allies are good and green-white sounds like a good allies deck. So there might be this effect that despite not seeing much of a change in terms of how archetype is drafted in 17 land user. This change is much stronger when we look at the generic arena population. It is from Premier Drafts, so Journal MTG. I only use best of one drafts unless otherwise stated in my seminars. Just sample sizes are bigger. It's easier to analyze. 3 games plus sideboarding, that also adds extra complication that I don't think is necessary for that. And also, matches in best of 3 are way faster and often lopsided compared to what best of 1 has to offer. That's why I focus on best of 1. And also, it's the most played format in limited. So yeah. Okay, but yeah. So what I wanted to draw your attention to is that, okay, we see that Dimir and Azorius are drafted a bit higher, but Golgari and Gruul, despite having very, very similar win rate numbers, we see that, Azorius 55.9, Dimir 55.8, Golgari and Gruul 55.3.2. It's super close to what Azorius and Dimir have to offer. And it's pretty open, which means that sort of semi-reliably you will get like a green base, and then you just open a couple of green or red strong cards, and then voila, you have yourself a deck that can compete. So I would watch those specifically 2 color combinations and try to maybe, I don't know, take a peek at recent trophy lists that contain those colors and see what people are doing that trophies with Golgari and Gruul, because I think that looking at the win rate, absolutely perfectly possible to trophy with those decks. And they seem to be relatively open compared to things like Azorius and Dimir. Okay, so that covers the metagame evolution. Just a quick update on how the format has been panning out in the recent week and a bit. And hopefully now we can move to the actual data for the episode. So, before I go to that, I made one episode about format evolution, and there I show a lot of data how the format evolves. But I think it's good to have a slight recap of how any format sort of evolves in terms of conceptualizing it. And I would say that first days of the format are very often defined by knowing which colors are the best, and then picking those best colors, and then honing how you build decks using those colors. Because initially, we can figure out that, okay, these colors are pretty strong. And you build decks, they're not optimal, but they are at least in good colors, so you're going to beat the opponents that play the bad colors and have suboptimal decks. First week of the format or so, you should start knowing what the best cards are. That's why I wait, and roughly around 4 or 5 days into the format, I make the episode highlighting the best commons and uncommons. When you go to the middle format, you should start knowing best plans. It's not only the best cards, it's not only the best colors, but you know also what those colors want to be doing. And by that, you can select cards that will be contextually good in those color combinations. And that's the strength that you need to get to move to the mid format and continue winning. And in the late format, I think the biggest bonus you can get is you can have a wide range of knowledge. Some people go through a format by drafting one color combination, and some of them very successfully. But I think that if you truly want to learn how to draft in the late format, the range of your knowledge, the range of the plans that you know, the adaptability, because knowledge allows you for that adaptability towards different drafting plans. This is what's going to push you across the line. And I think that there is sort of drawbacks of getting the early format win rate and late format win rate. I think when you get a very high early format win rate, you very often abuse the abusable strategy for as long as it's physically possible. But then you have a problem with transition to this mid and late format, because you spend all the beginning in abusing the exploitable strategy. And because of that, you didn't spend time learning the range of knowledge and range of adaptability and range of plans that you can understand. However, if you're looking for this range early in the format, you're going to tank your win rate because you're not doing the exploitable strategy, and you're going to be losing to week 1 busted decks that are built like that because people who draft them are preying on inexperienced drafters who do a lot of drafting in the first week and then disappear. And opportunistically, you can abuse that. So yeah, drawbacks on both sides. But I think my favorite approach to the format is I like to get to the stage where I have wide range of knowledge and I have adaptability during draft. Now, partially, I don't think I should be running a podcast about limited if I did not have that attitude, because it's part of my non-job to have a wide range of knowledge and to understand multiple archetypes. I don't have to be an expert in all of them. Some of them I even didn't draft ever, but I maybe played against them. But I have to at least spend some time thinking about how that should look like, what cards are important. Obviously, my advantage that I have is that I can look through at the data for a particular card combination, and I know how to treat it in such a way that that data will tell me the story of what the plans are. I can look at the duration of the games. I can look at combinations of cards that perform well. I can look at the key cards that enable winning for that particular deck. So I know how to extract this information. But I think that even if you don't know anything about data analysis, it's worth for you to scroll through color specific win rates and look for cards that indicate where a plan for a given color pair is. For the draft portion of the data, I looked at the data from the 17 lands public data set. So this is not something only I have access to. You also can download this data. It's freely available. It's a massive 3 GB CSV file with all the picks from 46,000 drafts, I think, being logged. And there is a minor oops in the data set. And it's a painful oops because I finally decided to do an episode on the draft portion, which I haven't done in a while. And of course, it happened in a set that does not log the first pick. Early in the format, I hoped it will be a temporary issue, but unfortunately, since the beginning of the last Airbender, Arena just does not log correctly what was in the first pack. And 17 lands, if it's not logged, 17 lands is powerless. It cannot really see the packs because they are not logged because of some minor tweak to the Arena logs development of this set. And it's been flagged. Hopefully, it's going to be fixed relatively soon, but not just yet. And it's a pain because so much data that I wanted to analyze is gone, and I cannot draw full conclusions, and there's always like shadow of a doubt over all the analysis I've done further. But one big analysis that I did is how often do people abandon their early picks, with the caveat that I don't look at how often they abandon their first pick. I could have inferred it, but it was so much fluff that I decided not to. And how does either sticking to their early pick or abandoning it impact the win rate of the players? So I was looking at the first 6 picks, which cards are most likely to end in the final deck, and which ones are the least likely to end in the final deck. And also through that, hopefully I can introduce you to the concept of speculative early pick. So the most defended card in the whole set, and because of the cutoffs that I did on the sample sizing, it's mainly commons and uncommons, maybe some of the less important or less juicy rares also made the list. But the most defended card in the draft is Sokka, Lateral Strategist. And 91% of the time, almost 92% of the time, when it was drafted within the first 6 picks, it ended up in the deck. And it makes sort of sense because it's a hybrid card. Yes, a double pipped hybrid card, but Sokka performs really well in all the blue decks and all the white decks, and obviously in the white blue as well, where it's absolutely trivial to cast. But in the other decks, despite being like technically a blue generic or white generic card, it still does pretty well. Because of that, it can go to 70% of the color pairs, which means it will be played a lot. So if you pick it, it will rarely happen that you will pivot into a color combination that does not contain either white or blue. And because of that, and because of the fact that it's a card worth defending because it's pretty strong, Sokka is the most likely to be in your deck when you pick it in the first 6 picks. And then we have like a whole splatter of cards that are between 89 and 86%. So significantly below Sokka. Sokka is like an outlier in this category. But then we have like Messenger Hawk, another card that benefits from being a hybrid. Lost Days benefits from being splashable because it's a 5-drop. Rumble Arena, well, it's a land, so it's easy to play it, and it's actually a solid one. And then we have like Invasion Submersible, which is a very powerful card. Pretending Pogs Bears, the white-black hybrid, and that again will benefit from being a hybrid. Aang, the Last Airbender, that's a powerful card, very powerful card, and probably that's why it's people stick to it, and also in one of the strongest colors. And we have Forecasting Fortune Teller, Zhongzhong's Deserters, and Glider Kids. So first thing that struck me there, most of the cards are blue and white. I mean, technically Messenger Hawk can be black, and Pretending Pogs Bears can be black. But we have Sokka that is blue-white, Lost Days blue, Submersible blue, Aang white, Forecasting Fortune Teller blue, Zhongzhong's Deserter and Glider Kids both white. So first of all, people are more likely to end up with a functional deck if they start white and blue, and then they defend those cards quite strongly, potentially because they're so open that it's not that difficult to defend them either. And hybrid seems to be giving extra boost to those cards, like extra ability for us to be able to defend them. And how does it look like? Yeah, these are all good cards. I mean, not all of them are great. I mean, like Pretending Pogs Bear is not really a good card. Forecasting Fortune Teller is not like an amazing card. It has its moments. And Zhongzhong's Deserters is also not like the most amazing card, but it's a cheap card at least, and that's why you need the density of 2-drops in this format, and they provide that. So let's look at those cards, and I think that 2 of them are just the power outliers. Invasion Submersible and Aang, the Last Airbender. When they end up in your deck, those decks will have 59% win rate, which is pretty strong. It's not the card win rate, it's the win rate of the deck. And when you abandon Invasion Submersible and Aang the Last Airbender, you have a huge drop in the win rate, actually 55.3, 55.9. So roughly, 3 percentage points difference if you abandon. But 3 percentage points is huge difference, but it's not terrible. I think that part of the why there is such a big difference is because Invasion Submersible and Aang are both very powerful cards. Because they're powerful cards, people are less likely to try to abandon them and maybe linger drafting that white or drafting a blue a bit too long when they shouldn't. Then there's like the second tier of the cards in terms of their power level in Sokka, Lost Days, Zhongzhong's Deserters, and Glider Kids. These cards have good 58% win rate when they are staying in the lane. And Lost Days, if you abandon it, you have a very similar win rate. Now, is it because it's good to abandon it? I don't think so. It's just probably that people abandon Lost Days much easier than they would abandon Invasion Submersible or even Sokka. And also there might be a color effect because Lost Days is blue, and then Sokka is not white, but Zhongzhong Desert and Glider Kids are both white cards, and we see a bigger drop in the win rate from 58 to around 55 in case of Zhongzhong Deserters and Glider Kids. While things like Messenger Hawk and Lost Days are close to each other, they're 58 to 57.7 or 57 to 57.2. And Forecasting Fortune Teller are the same. So it seems that if you are drafting relatively hard way, you probably are fine abandoning blue if you see that it's not open. And people do that, it seems, from the data. Rumble Arena is a funny one because abandoning Rumble Arena increases the win rate. And the explanation is very simple. Rumble Arena is very often used for splashing. Splashing usually comes with a win rate penalty. If people abandon the Rumble Arena that they picked early, it means that they don't have the need for fixing their mana, and or they are very likely never splashing, and that will explain the why abandoning Rumble Arena will have an increase in the win rate. And there are cards like Pretending Pogs Bearers, who you rarely abandon, but you're also not super thrilled to play. Because if you put them in your deck, you have 56% win rate. If you don't, you also have a 56% win rate. These are not the win rates we're interested in for your decks. We want our cards that we pick in the first 6 cards of the draft, we want to be in that 58, 59 area if possible. And then we have the cards that are least defended. And these are maybe more interesting because we can, of course, speculate that hybrid cards are easier to defend because they are easier to cast and go into 70% of the decks. But why do we abandon cards? So let's look at which ones are the most abandonable. And the most abandonable card in the format from the dataset is Air Nomad Legacy, which is only played 56% of the time when you picked it early in the game. And I think that this card is specifically outlier for multiple reasons. First of all, it's a multicolor card. So pick it early, you'll not always end up in the blue-white. And that's a reason for abandoning it. But I had decks when I ended up in blue-white, and I still didn't play Air Nomad Legacy because I just did not get the density of flyers. So multiple things have to come together for Air Nomad Legacy to be great. And that's, I think, why I think this card is the opposite of speculative pick. Speculative pick, I wanted to have an upside, and probably I already want to have something that will help me playing this card. And Air Nomad Legacy, I don't think has enough going for it. This for me is a classic reward card that in Pack 3, when I have enough flyers and I'm already solid into blue-white, I'm happy to pick it because actually there are spots where the card is amazing. What other cards do we see? Iroh the Tea Master, 60% play rate. So 40% of the time you pick Iroh Tea Master, you abandon it. Again, it's a 2-color card, which means that you specifically need to end red and white. It will not always happen, and it's not good enough, I think, to be splashed in a white-green deck or something. I'd rather have something else. Another card, Leaves from the Vine. It's 60% play rate, so 40% of the time people scrap it. And I don't know, I'm not particularly keen on playing that card in any situation, and I wouldn't advise playing it at all. But okay, Thierry Ramboa in the chat is bragging that he is splashing Iroh Tea Master in blue-white decks. But I've seen some decks that Thierry drafted, and he's splashing a lot in a lot of decks. So he shouldn't be a milestone. He should be more like a warning in the human form. Don't do those things. Stay to the 2-color lane. Put more consistency in your decks rather than having memes. But it does work for him. So on the other hand, maybe he's a genius. Leaves from the Vine. Yeah, I just wouldn't put this. I know you were doing great, but you are also a world championship level player, and this podcast is aimed at sort of intermediate to beginner players, which copying certain strategies should be banned and punishable by getting slapped on the hands until you get a certain level of confidence with playing simpler decks. I think that this is something I was preaching a lot in some other episodes, and maybe not here, but I think everything is possible. Splashing is working fantastically great. Picking cards that are questionable in terms of the win rate is great. But it all has its level of development. And I think that a lot of content is trying to sell the idea that you can do literally anything. But I do have those episodes when I look at the win rates of cards between different tiers of players, and you can't do everything. There is certain order of how how you are learning to draft and to master the game, and you cannot jump those levels. It's the same as with learning the piano. I'm going to reuse that analogy. You don't start by playing Rachmaninoff. You start by playing simple finger exercises, and then learning the chords, and learning to play with one hand, and then learning with the other hand. And then after a couple of years, you are maybe ready to play Rachmaninoff. Trying to play Rachmaninoff on day one is probably not the best strategy of learning how to play the piano. And it's the same with playing Magic. Starting by drafting very complicated splashy decks that require particular synergies, have very narrow lanes in order how to win, or like the classic Sam Black, Rube Goldberg machinery decks where there is an infinite loop of not milling yourself through the graveyard and zero win conditions, are not exactly the best way of learning how to play the game. And I'm not going to tell you that you're too stupid to draft a certain combination of cards, because clearly I can't judge it, especially since I don't know who you are. But I would highly encourage players to try to position themselves. So where do you think you are on that learning scale? Did I already master good combat decisions? Do I know when to turn the corner? Do I know how to play defensively? Do I know how to prioritize life preservation over removal preservation in your hand? If you start asking yourself those questions, that you can position yourself where you are, then you can sort of start feeling what kind of plans am I ready for, and what kind of plans I'm not ready for. And I always give example of LSV and his cube decks. And most players, if they try to emulate what LSV is doing in the cube drafts, they would lose out win rate on trying to copy that. Because some of those decks just require a very skilled and experienced player to navigate them. Otherwise, they're going to be just a pile of garbage. And people have that experience when they try to, I saw LSV drafting a similar deck and going and trophying, and I just drafted it and went 0-3. Well, there's a reason why he's LSV. Anyway, Leaf Sword Divine, let's skip it. Invasion Tactics, very specific card, green card that requires you to have a density of allies. And sometimes you will just not get it. So not only you can abandon it because it's a 5-drop and you have too many 5-drops, not only can abandon it because you don't have a density of creatures and you want to go wide with this card, but also you require a certain number of allies, which would give the extra kind of kicker on why not to play it. Next card, Gather the White Lotus at 61%. Now this card wants you to be as close to mono white as possible. And it's not always possible to be as close to mono white as possible. I mean, and sometimes being as close to mono white as possible is not close enough for being able to play Gather the White Lotus, because you need realistically 10, 12 planes in your deck in order to play that card successfully. So that's why sometimes the card is going to be abandoned, but we're going to come back to it when we look at the win rates. Then we have Platypus Bear, which will be sometimes abandoned because you just don't get density of lessons, and you don't want to play 2-3 defender creature in your deck. Waterbending Scroll, similar as Gather the White Lotus, you will not always get the density of islands. We also have Cat Gator in that list at 65%, so 35% of the time it's going to get abandoned because you might not get enough swamps in your deck. Then we have Cunning Maneuver, a combat trick that you don't always want to have in your deck, so 35% abandonment. And keep in mind, these are only data from when you pick it in the first 6 picks. You don't really want to pick Cunning Maneuver in your first 6 picks at all. So no wonder that people abandoned it, because probably there was some poor card or even a misclick that made them pick it. And last, at 65%, Tolls of War, another very cheap multicolor card. So if we look at the list of those least defended cards, we see a bunch of multicolor cards that are also often built around, like Air Nomad Legacy, like Iroh Team Master, like Tolls of War, and also specifically cheap multicolor cards. We don't see the multicolor 6-drops or something. And then we also saw the bunch of those monocolor build around cards like Cat Gator, like the Waterbending Scroll, and like Gather the White Lotus. Because monocolor decks are not forcible. You need to find the right lane. And if you pick early, you don't know if you're in the right lane to draft a monocolor deck. Maybe in week 1 it was possible, but nowadays definitely not. You need to find the right lane. And now let's look at the win rates when you kept the card in your deck or when you didn't. And a lot of them have low win rates when you kept them in the deck. The Air Nomad Legacy, 55, Leaves from Divine, 53, Waterbending Scroll, actually 52. This is early Waterbending Scroll. I didn't do the data for what happens when you pick it late and you play it in your deck. I'm pretty sure it's going to be much higher. But I think that this is the sort of like something that you need to figure out in the format, that some cards are not forcible, and Waterbending Scroll clearly is not. Picking it early and trying to go as close to mono blue as possible is detrimental for your win rate. When people abandon that lane and not play Waterbending Scroll, their win rates goes up to 56%. But some cards, like Gather the White Lotus, when it works, 58%. When it doesn't, 56%, which is still decent because you probably are quite deep into white, and white is a strong color. But yeah, White Lotus is a card that I would be happy to speculate on and pick early. And then if the white lane doesn't work, I'm still fine. Waterbending Scroll, not the one. Cut Gator, I'm sort of happy to speculate on it. Because I think that this card is of the monocolored payoffs is the one that requires you to be least monocolor of them all. I'm happy to play 8 Swamps and Cat Gator, because if I cast Cat Gator that drains for 3 to any target and leaves me with a 3/2 lifelinker, I'm actually fine. I'd rather have it deal 4 or 5, but I'm fine with 3. And yet, Iroh is a strong card, but also abandoning it did not have too much of a penalty. It stays at like 57% roughly on the win rate. So these cards, despite a high abandonment rate, can have pretty high win rate, because when you look at the Gather the White Lotus, it's around 58%, which is the same as something like Lost Days or Sokka the Lateral Strategist or Zhongzhong's Deserters, which turns out have a high win rate when they are picked early. Probably also early data gets that improved. But of course, I'd rather pick a card that has a 58% win rate when I keep it in my deck, if I know that I'm going to keep it in my deck 91% of the time and not 61% of the time, like I would have in case of the Gather the White Lotus. So here, despite equal win rate when we play those both of those cards, the consistency of being able to play it is what's going to be a tiebreaker for me. So if I see Sokka and Gather the White Lotus, no brainer, I'm picking up Sokka. But if I see a mediocre card like, say, Forecasting Fortune Tender and Gather the White Lotus, and I don't know, I already have like 2-3 white cards in my pool, I'm super happy to speculate on it, because if it works out, and it works out frequently enough, let's say 50% of the time, I'm getting a better card. I'm getting a card that's going to be defining my... Okay. So here, I try to look at the link between the play rate of those cards. So these are all the cards that I had in the data set. Their play rate and the win rate when played. And I wanted to see if there is a connection between how frequently you play the card and how high is the win rate. And there is. There is a positive correlation between those two factors. So cards that are played more frequently are having also a higher win rate. So for example, here we have this Air Nomad Temple at 56% played and at 55% win rate. And here we have the Sokka with over 90% of the games played and around 58% win rate. But when we look at all of them, there is this significant upslope trend. So cards that we play more frequently will have a higher win rate, or cards that have a higher win rate will play more frequently. And what that tells me is that independent of the players who played those cards, they sort of intuitively know which cards are worth defending and which cards are not worth defending. And potentially also how the tables are open on average on Arena will promote cards with certain higher win rate. This is not like a super dominant effect, and as you can see, there's a generous cloud of those dots, but R squared of 0.2 means that at least a good 20% of the relation between those points is explained by this play rate and win rate when played. On the other hand, the win rate of the cards when they are abandoned, now that looks like a random effect. We don't see any kind of trend. The fact that we play the card 50% or 90%, it doesn't matter. When we abandon it, it does not have any link with the win rate when you abandon it. So that's why when we look at this data, we should focus on what happens, what is the play rate, and not too much on what is the win rate when you abandon the card, because that looks like it's a more of a random effect. R squared of 0.0007. Down, 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 down. But also that's a very insignificant interaction between those two variables. Okay. Last bit of analysis, and I'm going to talk a bit about the player's skill, and I use the word skill here, but I shouldn't, but also there's not a very good way of talking about it. I don't mean skill, I mean win rate, and win rate is not necessarily, win rate is a proxy of skill, but it's not necessarily skill itself. But do different win rate players differ in their draft behavior? And what are those differences, and what can we learn from them? So what I did is 17 Lens data in its public dataset form has, for each draft, it will have what was the first pick. Well, apart from the fact that it won't have the first pick because logs are not logging the first pick. But okay, normally it should have the first pick. What is the second pick? What was in the pack? What was the result of the draft? How many games were played with it? What is the ID? What day was the game played? And then there's like hundreds and hundreds of columns with which cards were in the pack and which cards were in the pool from the earlier picks. And then at the complete end of it, if you scroll through the whole file to the last possible column, you have user win rate bracket. And this shows us what is the sort of win rate of the player. Not an exact one, because 17 Lens wants to anonymize it as good as possible, but a bracket. So let's say that if a player's win rate is between 54 and 56%, it will be in the 54% bracket. If the player's win rate is going to be between 56 and 58, it's going to be in the 56% bracket. So what I can do is I can look at different win rate brackets and see, are there any difference in how people are drafting? And indeed, that's what I did. And I looked at one specific thing, is what is the average card main deck rate based on a pack by different win rate. So different colors, red is pack 1, gray is pack 2, and blue is pack 3. So in pack 3, we see that if you're in the 40% win bracket or in the 68% win rate bracket, roughly the same kind of 61% of the cards end up in your deck. And there's no difference between them. Now, first things to notice is that cards from pack 3 finish in your deck much less often than cards from pack 1 or pack 2. This is a big difference. So pack 3, the pack that is traditionally considered to be, this is where the rewards are. If you picked your lane correctly, you're going to be rewarded with good cards. Well, it turns out that actually, no, it's when you're finding your lane that you're rewarded for some weird reason. And pack 3 is the one that contributes the least towards our draft, which is sort of weird. But also we see that there is no difference between the different player brackets. But when we look at the pack 1, players who have like 40% win rate, well, 66% roughly of their picks from that draft will end up in the deck. And if you go to 68% players, only like 63.5% of the card will end up in the deck. And you may think it's a small difference, but actually it sort of corresponds to almost one pick, like 0.8 picks. So there's going to be way more cards from pack 1 that go into the low win rate players deck. And there is very gradual, quite a strong interaction. R squared of 0.7 means that there is a very good linkage between those numbers. Doesn't mean there's a causation, but I think I can propose a quite believable mechanism for that. And that is forcing. I think that players who have lower win rate will often jump on the color pair early and try to draft every single card from that color in the first pack as early as possible, in the sort of vain hope of cutting those colors and then getting the color back without even straying from the original lane. Players who have a higher win rate are going to be looking for the open lane in the first pack, which means that they will make some picks that will not go into their deck more frequently because, pack 1, I'm picking a strong white rare. Pack 2, I see Invasion Submersible. I'm picking that. That's basically a rare. Pack 3, I see Firebending Lesson. And maybe there's nothing amazing in white or blue. I'm happy to pick the Firebending Lesson and see, am I blue-red? Am I white-red? Am I white-blue? We will see. Maybe pick 7 is going to lead me to that. But until then, I'm quite open. And I think that this is the main difference. And to some smaller extent, we see that effect also in pack 2. But then we just drop from 64% to 63.5%. That's a much smaller lane. Okay, chat. Are you awake? Do you see what is the corollary of this graph? This is a dropping line, pack 1. Pack 2 is a dropping line, and pack 3 is a constant line. And that means that lower skill players or lower win rate players are playing fewer cards. The higher skill players play fewer cards from the draft. And this is also a weird finding. And yeah, believe it or not, if you plot it, there is a good 0.4 of a card difference between how many cards from the draft players are playing. Players from the 40-45% win rate bracket are playing 23.5 cards roughly, and players from the 70% or 65% bracket play like 23.1, 23.2. So there is a difference. And I tried to account for that difference. I thought initially I had a couple of I have a couple of hypotheses. I could not fully confirm them. I will be able to do it maybe in a week or so when the game data is released. So far, we only have the draft data, so I'm a bit limited on what I can do. But I thought, and at first I thought maybe lower win rate players are playing more lands. That was my first hypothesis. Sojourn, these are the other alternative hypotheses that I was looking: 16 lands or 41 card decks. These ones I could not distinguish, unfortunately. But first thought was that maybe lower win rate players are splashing more. If you're splashing more, you play more non-basic lands. And because non-basic lands will go into the deck, they will have a higher count of drafted cards. But I looked at the data and I actually compared data on how many non-basic lands are being played in a deck by top and bottom win rate players. There was no difference. It was basically like it's around 1.8 non-basic lands per deck, independent of the win rate. I didn't even plot it because the difference were so minute that it would just be a straight line across the screen. But okay, if I excluded that, then the other explanations are lower win rate players play 16 lands more often, or lower win rate players play 41 card decks more often. And watch this space next week or in 2 weeks when the game data is released on 17 lands. I'm definitely going to check which of the two it is. My guess would be 41 card decks. I think that lower win rate players have this find it harder to make the last cuts. I see that often when people ask for deck decks, they are usually this one cut short, and then they decide to keep it and play some kind of a weird combination of lands, maybe 17 lands with 41 cards, and it costs on the win rate. 16 lands is more contentious because when you look at the data, 16 land decks have an extremely high win rate, but I think that extremely high win rate of 16 land decks is driven mainly by ultra aggressive decks forced by some extremely high win rate players from set to set. And yeah, that's contributing to the high win rate of 16 land decks, while a larger number of the 16 land decks from weaker players is just not winning that much. And I have to find a set where I have a good data to look at the problem of 16 lands and 17 lands, because in most sets 16 land decks have, if not slightly higher, than at least comparable win rate with the 17 land decks. Problem with that is that sample sizes are very disparate, and it's very hard to draw some solid conclusion from that, because we're comparing totality of decks with a very small subset of decks, and I will have to find a neat way of figuring it out by maybe comparing decks by composition and then trying to look at the win rates of the 16 and 17 lands decks from the similar areas on the composition spectrum of composition gradient of the set. So maybe I'll figure it out, but that will be something for the next weeks. To end today, I think that people worry too much about their initial picks and worry too much about abandoning. I think that there is this like maybe psychological even fear of abandoning the early picks from your draft. And you should worry a bit less, because in the end, the impact of that is not that strong. As long as you pick strong cards and you know which cards are powerful in the format and which cards are like good speculative picks and which cards are just solid, you're going to get so far. It's so much more important than if you end up playing them or not. Because if you don't end up playing your first pick, it's probably for a good reason of either the color being cut or you finding a better lane. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you find a better lane, you should be drafting it. And if the color was cut, then you should probably abandon it. So I don't think that you should worry about abandoning, even though it sometimes feels bad that you drafted this amazing first pick rare and the stars just didn't align to play it. Hopefully next time it will, and maybe you get rewarded with the sneaky great rare in the color lane that you identified as open in pack 3. Like I would have had if I picked the Azula, and I would have had the Rise of Sozin. I still trophied with a white deck with one rare that pulled all the weight. But okay, with that, I'll see you next week when hopefully I'm going to have some data on the gameplay, and I can answer. And by the way, I didn't forget, I have another Patreon question of the week that I couldn't unfortunately answer, but I will try to figure out how many lost days is too many lost days. And hopefully we'll get the game data that can answer that question. As always, I'd like to thank 17 Lands for being there and being awesome. And thanks Fake Jake Brown, because Fake Jake Brown is a special person, and special people need special shout outs. And of course, look at this lovely logo that he prepared for me early in the days of the podcast and pulled me through all the technical issues and always listened to me nagging and then having my doubts and cheering me from the sidelines. It's important to have a person like that in your life, and I was lucky enough to get it. And with that, I'll see you next week when hopefully we're going to talk about the gameplay and maybe look at some spicy builds of different archetypes and finding some sub builds of color pairs and whatnot. But till then, enjoy drafting, and enjoy the direct. I think that there is a direct for regular boxes, but now every second uncommon from the set is seemingly costing $5, so maybe it's actually worth playing for those direct boxes. All right, see you next week then. Bye bye.